Good evening, everyone, and thanks for coming out on a beautiful day and evening. It's been an, shall I say, interesting week on campus, and it's only Wednesday, so we'll try and keep that going with our lecture tonight. I'm Bill Brown with Brookings Mountain West. Again, thanks for coming out. We're pleased to welcome our colleague Martha Ross out from the Brookings Institution, who's going to talk on a lecture on the topic, Challenges Facing Youth and Young Adults Entering the Labor Market. An important topic for this campus, for this community, for the state, for the nation, and judging by our audience, an important topic to all of you. The lecture, as you can see, is being recorded by our friends in Greenspun Hall here. It'll be up on our website in a few days. Martha's PowerPoint is already up on our website, so her data will be readily available to you. You'll see some national information as well as drilling down to some local employment and youth data. Let me tell you a little bit about Martha. She's a fellow in the Metropolitan Policy Program at Brookings, where her work focuses on human capital and strategies to increase skills, employment, and earnings of current and future workers. She has a master's degree from the University of Chicago School of Social Services Administration and a bachelor's degree from Colorado College. So I will gladly step aside and turn the podium over to Martha.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank Bill and other members of Brookings Mountain West for being such good hosts, as well as the many faculty and students that I've interacted with thus far. It's been a real pleasure. I've never been to Las Vegas before, so this is a very good introduction to this city. The topic today is the labor market and young adults, which I'm defining here generally as people aged 18 to 24. Which is a pivotal point as you move into adulthood. We all know that this is a college campus. Education beyond high school is necessary, increasingly, with some exceptions, to get a job enabling financial independence. Those with only a high school diploma or less have higher unemployment rates and lower earnings, and there's a million studies and reports on that. But while the message about a college education, the importance of it, is clear, the path is not always smooth. More education means more transitions. It means making sure you graduate from high school, you find a next step, whether that's a college or an apprenticeship or a training program that's affordable and a good fit, and that you complete that. And then you enter the labor market with skills for the kind of job that you like and that offers upward mobility. So transitions are a time of promise, but they're also a time of vulnerability, and they're a time when people can fall off track. And there's also the question of whether a college education, which traditionally means a bachelor's or an associate's, is the only kind of education that matters or that we should value. I'll talk about it a fair amount in this talk, primarily because it's the easiest to measure, which is not the same as being the only thing that matters. But I'm relying on census data, and what they can tell you very clearly is whether or not someone has an associate's degree or bachelor's. It's not as clear to tell you if someone has done an apprenticeship, if someone has had on-the-job training, if someone has earned a shorter-term certificate in something that does lead to a good job and that represents real skill building. So there are other pathways to consider, and that I'm going to argue that we should also expand. This slide shows employment rates by age, and it's broken out as well by race and ethnicity. So employment rates refer to the share of a population that has a job. So for instance, in 2008, 39% of white teenagers had a job, and that fell to 34% in 2014. So there's a lot of lines here and a lot of colors the big takeaways are that employment rates start low, and for everyone, they get higher as you get older. The other important point is that there are real racial and ethnic disparities. The red line on the top is white people, so they have the highest rate in every age group, followed by Latinos among teens and young adults. Asians, the green line, have the lowest rates among teens and young adults, primarily because they're focusing on school. If you look at their school enrollment in that time period, it's very high. And then by the time they are prime age workers, 25 to 54, they have very high employment rates. But again, the difference is by race. So what you'll see there is that 79 out of 100 white adults had a job in 2014 compared to 72 out of every 100 African Americans. But the spread in employment rates by education is much, much wider than the spread by race and ethnicity. This only shows young adults and I guess you'd call them regular adults, I don't know, 25 to 54-year-olds, because teens haven't had much of a chance to do much more than go to high school, maybe finish, maybe start a year of college. So the top red line are people with bachelor's degrees, and they 89% of young adults with a bachelor's degree had a job in 2008 before the recession. And that figure held pretty steady. It fell to 87% in 2014. And it fell during the recession, but not as much as it did for other groups. Now, the blue line at the bottom is people with less than a high school diploma. And among the 20 to 24-year-olds, that's a difference of 35 percentage points between 52% working, 52% of people with less than a high school diploma versus 87% of people with a bachelor's degree. The spread narrows a bit when you get to adulthood. That's probably because work experience does count. And with skills that you've learned on the job, you are more likely to be able to get or keep a job, and because especially among some of the older folks of that cohort, they may have entered the labor market when it was more welcoming to people with only a high school diploma. So this pattern, employment to education pattern, holds in the Las Vegas area, but the differences are a little bit less. So the 20 to 24-year-olds, there's a lot of year-to-year variation there, and it's because it's a relatively small sample size. So the important thing is that the red line representing BA holders is higher than the green line representing high school graduates, and the blue line representing people with less than high school. The exact year-to-year variation is less important than the broader pattern. And then you see that the numbers are a bit smoother among adults, 25 to 54. So 84% of adults with a bachelor's degree were working in 2014, compared to 73% of people with a high school diploma and 67% of people with less than a high school diploma. Now, let's look at the educational pipeline for 18 to 24-year-olds. How many are in school? How many have graduated? And how many have simply decided that they were finished and left without a piece of paper? So this is back to national data. A little more than half of all young adults, 18 to 24, are in school, 52%. Most of them are in college. Hello. 8% are not in school and left with a degree. And 40% are not in school and don't have either an associate's or a bachelor's. Now, most of that group that left school without a college degree, most of them have a high school diploma. So, some of them do have some college, which is a hard measure to interpret because you don't know if it means they took one class and left, they took 3.5 years and left, they had an apprenticeship and left without a degree. But what we do know from other data sets is that unfortunately most people in that some college group have not earned another credential, like a certification or a license or anything like that. So now let's look at that same information, but pulling in Las Vegas and Clark County. And here's where you can tell that I was responsible for the graphics and not our graphic designer, because it is so much less attractive. So on the top you have the same information about the US, that 52% are in school. What you can see is that here a smaller share are in school. 38% and in Las Vegas and 40% in Clark County. And the largest share of folks are not in school and don't have an associate's or bachelor's degree. Now let's look at those folks who are not in school and ask, what are they doing? Most of them are working. You can see here of the share that is working is higher. Share that is working is higher in Las Vegas and Clark County than in the U.S. as a whole, and that is a response to the local economic base here and the heavy concentration of tourism and gaming and hospitality, where the barriers to an entry-level job are fairly low and those jobs are plentiful. So it's probably more possible here to get a foothold in the labor market with lower levels of education than it is in other places. And with that dense concentration of hospitality-related jobs, it's also possible that there are more upward mobility options than there would be if you were, say, working at one of 3 delis in town in another place that wasn't so full of restaurants. Sorry, I'm going backwards. Okay, so the fact that young people are working and not in school, what is worrisome about it is if they have relatively low levels of education, because what they're trading current earnings that could be pretty good for longer term stability. Now, I know that there are caveats to this because there are ways to get more skills and improve your earnings without going to college. Hopefully later this week, I'm going to meet with people at the Culinary Training Institute and and learn more about the kinds of job training that happens on the job and organized through the union management partnership. However, while that's a lot bigger group here in Las Vegas than it is in other places, it's still probably not most of the people here who have only a high school diploma or less and are working. So what you can see is that in Las Vegas and Clark County, 2/3 of the people who are working and not in school have at most a high school diploma. And just to hammer you over the head with this, even in a place like Las Vegas, if you have lower levels of education, you are much more likely to be out of work. And I have heard a fair amount about, and I believe these stories, about people who can earn a lot of money on the Strip without going to school. They may moonlight from their, quote, real job and earn more there than they do in the job for which they earned a bachelor's or a master's. But the fact is you're playing longer odds if you don't have an associate's or a bachelor's degree. Or what I can't say much about here with this data, shorter term certificates or apprenticeships. So what do we do? There's a lot we can do, and many of these kinds of things are happening all over the country, but they are not happening at the scale required. And we're not doing any favors to ourselves or to our young people by putting them in a situation where it's likely they may well be on the margins of the labor market and the economic mainstream. Even as many employers say they can't find the workers that they need. So some of these options, I'm sure that there are examples of these happening here in Las Vegas, in Clark County. Much stronger advising in high school and college. You will hear a lot about high school counselors whose job it is to advise on colleges, but they have huge caseloads, and their job is not to really know anything about the local labor market or anything in depth about the value of an apprenticeship program versus a 4-year degree, or the fact that with an associate's in engineering, you may earn more than someone with a bachelor's in early childhood education. Now, earnings is not everything, but it's part of the picture, and having a fuller picture of the options would be beneficial. And the schools are graded on graduation rates and college going rates. They are not graded or judged on whether their students 4 to 6 years later have good jobs, or whether they have successfully had internships in high school that helped prepare them for future employment. Next up is dual enrollment. One of the students who was in one of the classes that I did a guest lecture in this week was a graduate of one of those programs, where you can either earn a full associate's degree while you're in high school, or you can earn some number of college credits. That's often with a community college, although it doesn't have to be. And especially for first generation college students who may not be sure about going to college at all, it just seems unfamiliar and intimidating. This is a great way to ease them into it, and then when they graduate from high school, they have college credits. They're walking onto campus already with a head start. There are ways to organize high schools so that they are less insular and more open to helping students explore different roles that they may want to be in the work world without compromising academic integrity. And I have talked with some folks here who have said that there's some very good vocational high schools here with very good graduation rates and college going rates. So there's a bit of an image problem here. Nationally, the vocational ed people are I don't know if you got the news, they're relabeling themselves as career and technical education, in part to avoid the stigma that has been attached to vocational education in the past, that it's for students who, quote, aren't college material, however that is decided. But there's lots of good models, and I am hoping to learn more about what is going on here, but there are career academies, where there was that combines rigorous academics with occupational training and career exposure, and there were earnings differences 8 years later among the graduates. And if you ever look at the job training literature, to have earnings differences that persist for 8 years is a really big deal. And it was especially true for young men of color, and they also showed some important benefits in terms of sort of life stability, being married, and I think that's what I can remember, most likely being married. Community colleges are hugely important. They're an anchor of whatever plan we develop to increase educational attainment among young people and adults. But they have really high attrition rates, and they, by their nature, are open access institutions. They take whoever comes, and that's their beauty. That's a feature, not a bug. But they have funding levels that are much lower than four-year colleges and universities, and they are tasked with being everything to all people, with preparing young people to get an associate's degree of arts, to transfer to a four-year degree, to work closely with employers to develop training programs and curricula aligned with the labor market, to help young people who are not yet college ready improve their math and English skills so that they are college ready. And it is hard to achieve all of those things, and there have been some very good analyses of internal reforms that community colleges can do to help improve the graduation rate. And it doesn't necessarily involve legislation or changes in how states and localities fund them, but it does involve changes in how they operate. One of the big ideas is to create more of a guided pathways regarding curriculum choices. So instead of a cafeteria approach, sort of like throwing the course book at someone, not throwing it at them, offering the course book to someone and saying, the world is your oyster, saying, we have laid out a couple of paths that form a coherent sequence of courses that are going to lead to a meaningful diploma, because otherwise it is very easy to pick courses that are not a good fit for you, that won't help you earn the degree that you want. And another issue is developmental education or remedial education. A lot of the people who are placed into that never get out of that into credit-bearing courses, and meanwhile they're using up their Pell Grant dollars, and they are having an experience of failure and feeling like, I guess college is not for me after all. So there's a lot of work to do around that. Sorry, I keep going backwards. And then greater connections between education and the labor market. Our educational system has a lot of strengths. We're diverse, we offer a lot of on-ramps, we offer flexibility and a lot of student choice. What we don't offer are clear pathways to go from school into the work world. And if you talk too much to a high school principal or college faculty, they're going to say, look, it's not my job to help someone make company X make widgets. So there's a pushback against that, and rightly so, because you don't want to turn higher education into a narrow job training program. But there's lots of room to increase the relevance of coursework and experiences to the work world and the skills that you need to navigate that different environment while retaining the integrity of a liberal arts education or a broader education. So there are programs that offer, do a lot of, quote, soft skills training for high school students, which basically means learning how to function in an office environment or a workplace environment where you're surrounded by adults whose job is not to take care of you, and learn how to interact with colleagues. One example of this, and the importance of helping young people learn this in a low-stakes environment. I was talking with someone who was running a summer jobs program where young people are placed in often subsidized jobs in nonprofits or in government, sometimes in private sector. And the person's supervisor said, "Oh, how was your weekend?" Well, I mean, I don't know how the tone was, but anyway, the young person said, "None of your business." And there was obviously a lot going on there in terms of how that young person viewed people in authority and older people and people, quote, getting into his business. And if that had been an entry-level job, he might be out the door. But through a summer jobs program, he was given the chance to make a mistake and not face really big penalties for it down the line. And lastly, and related to this about bringing school and employers back together, many employers, not all of them, many are insular themselves, and they don't really know about community colleges in their region or career and technical education programs in high school, or the fact that there are workforce boards, and they just expect that talent, or they act as though talent will come to them. And in part, that's because doing recruitment and identifying the skills that you need now and the skills that you'll need in the future and not relying on old boilerplate job descriptions is hard and time consuming. And if you are pretty busy with the work at hand, it is much easier to recruit through the ways you always have and just use the old job description that you had and not think clearly. Well, you know, do we really need a bachelor's degree requirement to be a systems administrator or to be a help desk operator? Maybe not, but you have to have the time and the wherewithal to step back, think about that, and then go through whatever process you need to do to change your job descriptions and your hiring criteria. And in some cases, that's going to be not a big deal at all, and in other cases, you're going to be part of a big company or a big institution, and it's a whole big thing to change a job classification. But that's the kind of thing that employers can do as well. So lastly, I want to bring it back to Las Vegas and Clark County. And the fact that this economy has been and may be more welcoming to people with a high school diploma or less. And the attraction of getting an early foothold in the labor market, and earning money so that and not going into debt to go to college. If you take a longer time horizon, as I mentioned before, that trade-off has some real costs, but it also has a cost for the economic situation of the region. I was talking with one of the professors about whether jobs follow people or people follow jobs, and if you do not have a relatively highly educated workforce, it's going to be harder to draw different kinds of industries to your region. So it will be harder to diversify and expand. I know this region was hammered during the recession, and there's been a lot of thought given to how to diversify this economy while, of course, staying true to some of its historic assets. But economic development can focus on that goal of long-term economic growth, bringing along the residents with them. And with not relying only on importing workers from outside, but thinking about how to grow workers from within to support economic growth and productivity. And that is it. I'd love to hear questions and comments.
Yes, hello, how are you? Very good, very good. Lots of very interesting points. And that last one, it may be that Las Vegas is a little inverted from the rest of the country, having grown up in the Midwest. And in fact, there's very active debate this week about if we do wind up bringing some jobs back home. It's a big debate in the Midwest, of course.
Yeah.
Do wind up bringing some jobs back home or more of the mix, then that is going to help people to have, more of a choice, and certainly more of a choice that aren't at quite high levels, like working in healthcare or computer. I mean, as a technical person, they're telling young adults now, well, it's good, you just work in software development or medical. But the thing is, again, you need diversification in a different way, I guess, than Las Vegas. But well, how will that impact? I mean, I think it will be good to get more diversification of the jobs in every area here, and may take different actions. But
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think that's one of the arguments about bringing a medical school here, is that will help anchor a new or strengthen the existing medical sector with more jobs and make it so that people don't have to leave the area for specialty surgery or that kind of thing.
I come from California, and I think it's a great idea that we have a medical, a dental school and a medical school that's moving over here. Well, the fact is, if you want to go to a medical school or a dental school, you would have to move out of state to do that. So it's a very good idea to have a medical school and a dental school and developing a business school. It's actually the business school here. It's very prominent and it's been improving over the years.
Yeah, it's a way to keep people. It's a way to prevent brain drain.
Do you have any information that would suggest the effect of having paid internships and how that leads into the workforce as opposed to unpaid internships and those who don't have an internship?
Well, the question, internships are important, and also it's also a very broad category. The problem with unpaid internships, as I'm sure you know, is that not everyone can afford an unpaid internship. So you are immediately you're immediately limiting that opportunity to a certain group of people. The value of internships, especially for high school students, I don't know if you're thinking about high school or college or either. There's a program based in DC that has expanded to a couple other places called Urban Alliance that places young people in paid internships in white collar environments. And they aim for high school juniors in kind of rough schools and the kids who are C students who aren't superstars and aren't failing and are going to graduate and then maybe flounder. So they give them a lot of prep on how you navigate this strange white-collar work world, and they get paid, and then they're placed in internships during the school year. And there's been a recent evaluation that found that one of its main effects was that it promoted more college going and persistence in college. So it didn't have an immediate labor market impact, but they But they were trying to couple that work experience as a teenager with preparation for longer term education. And it looks like it has, it's been successful. It's a lot of work to convince employers that a high school student can do meaningful and productive work. And it's a lot of work to help the supervisor think about what the job description should be. Like what can someone do who's there from 3 to 5, 4 or 5 days a week? There's a lot of really nitty-gritty work that goes into figuring out tasks that person can do that doesn't end up being more work for the supervisor. But there's a lot of things. There's, maybe you need a file converted from Excel to something else, and there's a lot of ways to do it, but you need staff people who can work with the employers to figure out those opportunities.
In reference to the career and technical education in high school, my sister and I actually went to a career and tech school. We went to the original one that was here in Las Vegas called Southeast Tech Career and Technical Academy, which is the old Vo-Tech. And I think now there's about 4 to 6 now around the valley. And we had a really good experience going there. The particular school that we went to had cosmetology, culinary, graphic design, all sorts of different majors. And I know especially for culinary and cosmetology, it was great because those students were able to go post-secondary into college, whatever they wanted to do. And in some cases, they were able to pay their way through college because they had that background. And in my particular case, I was in graphic design, and I was able to use my experience in graphic design and going to class there and apply that to college credit for the community college here in town. And her as well, she was able to apply that. So they do have kind of some pathways to college.
Yeah.
And we loved it. It was a great experience.
Yeah, I am a huge fan of that model.
We are too. Yeah.
We agree.
I was just wondering, where does automation play into this? Especially Las Vegas being such a service sector job, and the service sector is very vulnerable to automation. How does that play into it, and how should we prepare for that?
That's a really important question. And you are correct to note that the service sector is not immune. I think there's been a perception that it's only manufacturing, but it's not. Or that it's only quote, low skill jobs, but it's not. So the question of how we prepare is one that I worry that we are not on top of it in terms of federal, state, and local policy. What we need to do, I see 2 main components of training or education that needs to happen. One is people need to know how to work with machines so that they're not replaced by them. So that, and that's at multiple educational levels. If you're not comfortable with, using an electronic medical record, pretty soon it's going to be hard for you to get a job in healthcare. For a lot of times, I think this means technical skills of varying levels of specificity, or varying levels of, sophistication. There's a big move to promote software coding. There's a lot of organizations like code.org, and they're doing really good work. But there's going to be, but coding jobs are, a small number of jobs that are related to technology. So we have to think more about, do people know how to use content management systems? Do people know how to use Excel and spreadsheets? Are they comfortable learning new technologies? So I think that has to be woven into education. You may know more about what's happening in K through 12 and in higher ed on that up front than me. And then another element is working with people and engaging in problem solving. And so that you can continue to be a good complement to the machines and the robots. And what they're really good at is are activities that are predictable and routine and regular. So they're pushing against that boundary now more than people thought that they could, but that's still a big core of what they do. So people need to be able to do things that are unpredictable, that are not routine, and that rely on interactions with other human beings.
Oh, sorry. So in the case of, you mentioned that it's really important to advise high school students how important a college education is. However, we noticed that a lot of college students, like people coming out of college, they have very generalized majors and they're not able to get jobs. Like, where's the advisement in actually having a skill set in college and finding something that's productive to the workforce, and not having like super high expectations that you're graduating with a business degree and you expect to be like the CEO the next day? Because I feel like the expectations are set very high, but they're not realistic.
Yeah.
So it's like, where's the advisement for that skill set that's like for a certain job or for a certain area of expertise?
Yeah, the advising applies not just to high school, but to college. And the ability to weave in real-world work experience is also important in college. A lot of students do that on their own or assisted through their institution, through internships. There are a couple schools, both on the East Coast, Drexel University in Philly and Northeastern in Boston, that have very strong co-op programs where students are placed by the school for a semester in a company in doing work related to their field of study. I think what you've noted about aspirations is important, and it's also related, I think, to the blanket encouragement we give to everyone that they can go to college and that they should go to college. And this is a reaction, I think, to a legacy of tracking and discrimination, where college was only for some people and others, well, they just aren't college materials. And a lot of times that choice was not made by the individual student, but that was a label that was put upon them. So in response, everyone should go to college. However, we haven't combined that aspiration with the actual preparation to succeed in college and the know-how to apply, get financial aid, find a place that's a good fit. So similarly, people may have high aspirations for their careers, but they haven't been given the experiences to understand what the work world is like and how you move up.
I retired from the Navy. Another option for not everybody, but is military.
Yeah, that's true.
They provide skill levels of various types, and they will also provide assistance in job when you're getting out. So
It's true, and I didn't touch on that very much, but you're absolutely right. And I was someone made a really good comment that stuck with me about how good the military is at training and skill building and supporting people in learning new things and doing new things. And he was like, those big aircraft carriers, they're operated by a bunch of 19-year-olds, and they function like they can do it. And it's because there's a really good training system behind them.
plus it provides a discipline to start something and finish it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So alongside that point that she had just brought up, it's interesting to note that in order for us to go to school and have the skills that we need to be financially stable, the cost of going to school is also very expensive. And so it's difficult to encourage young students to go to school, because I'm hesitant to admit that, an education will lead to employment, but that statistic isn't necessarily related to financial stability. You can have a student who goes to school, has a great job, but owes $200,000 in debt because they went to a great school. So I'm curious to know how we can continue to empower students to move past the cost of college, because financial aid is not all inclusive. It goes out to a few, but not everyone else. And so, how do we empower students moving past high school? Because high school is free, and they can get those skills and then move into the workforce. But to further their education and to afford a career, it's difficult for us to empower those students. So.
Yeah, and affordability is a huge barrier, and it's both the upfront cost and the foregone immediate earnings that if you're going to school instead of getting a job right away. It's not something that I know a whole lot about. So I'd be curious to know what you think some good solutions would be.
I'll think about it.
Okay, we'll have coffee later.
Okay.
Yeah.
There have been some, in fact, there's some folks trying to advance things like, we refinanced crashing banks at 0.6%. So there's been some thoughts to doing a variety of publicly run refinancing, let alone just putting more money into the system so that it doesn't have to charge. Right, so no, I think there's been a couple of proposals.
Yeah, and there are some ideas about how to change how schools are financed as public institutions. Right now, the incentives are to enroll people. You get money per pupil. I'm kind of nervous because I think there are people here who know a lot more about this than I do. But money comes attached to students who enroll. You don't particularly lose money, or there's no built-in incentive to make sure they complete. So there's an incentive to enroll. So there are some places that have experimented with tweaking the funding formula so that you also, some of your public funding is dependent upon students persisting. So you have to be really careful with that, because you don't want to penalize institutions that are taking less prepared young people. But but that's one way to start changing their behavior to make sure that their students succeed, although it doesn't address your point about overall affordability.
Can I just chime in there?
Please.
Very good questions. And so you're right. One economic model used to be colleges and universities get money for every body and a seat in a classroom. This state is now turning towards rewarding schools for their graduation rate. So the incentive is to get people through. Now, what are the pluses and minuses of that, right? You want people to get through. They need a certificate, a degree, a diploma, whatever. But if your livelihood depends on getting people through, are you going to push people through with less training, less skills, because you need to show that you graduated X number of students or X percent of students? So that there's always a trade-off there. At this university, which has so many first-generation students, and as an access institution, it has a responsibility and a mission to support those students. It's not an institution that's could survive on a 4-year graduation rate.
Right.
Because, again, how prepared are your students when they walk in the door? So if you look at this institution, and again, because people are working to get through college, there are all kinds of reasons, a 6-year graduation rate has some validity for some institutions, I would think.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So it depends on where you are and all those external factors as well. You talked about advising, are the students coming to you relatively well prepared? Do they need remedial work? Is is the community college has to fulfill that function, or does your university have to fulfill that function? We're in a 2.2 person metropolis, right? That doesn't have another university, on the next street corner. This isn't, Boston or New York or whatever. So it all falls to a relatively small number of institutions, which creates a whole nother level of factors to consider.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear more from the subject of Martha's language, if you would, about what your experiences have been, what your concerns or fears are, how your friends and colleagues are dealing with this issue, and certainly for any parents in the audience who have to deal with this as well. I don't want to leave anybody out if you have a question or comment. Oh, I'm sorry, please.
I'm just chilling in the corner, so it's fine. So my concern is kind of going back to what he said. It's convincing that high school student that sees that easy job that is in California that's getting $15 an hour. Like, why not move out there and make money, and not have to worry about going to college? Because when you get out of college, if you do not have financial aid or any type of scholarships, and you're looking at that much of a thing on your back for the next several years, with that $15 an hour, you're paying that off. A lot of people are coming out of college and they have to look for minimum wage jobs because their majors don't apply to a bigger job because they had no internships. And I feel like if the idea of an internship and having that every single summer and inclusive that, people would have more of an experience going into the real world, coming out of college, and they actually have an idea of what they want to do. It's not like you step off the graduation platter and all of a sudden it's well, now what? Because a lot of people have that. Several of my friends who have graduated, it's well, I don't know what to do now. I don't know what I want to do. If I want to continue school, go to another school, do my master's or something. But it's with that kind of thing on your back, what's the point? So
Yeah, college and debt is a whole nother subject that Brookings has spent a lot of time with, and we've had some previous lectures on. One note I remember from my colleagues' talk is that with all the talk about student debt, that the largest source of student debt are these for-profit so-called universities and institutions that a lot of it is online, that in effect take your money, and whether they give you a degree or not isn't a driving concern. Some of them close up overnight. It gets to your point of the student who has attempted some form of higher education and hasn't gotten, never mind the piece of paper or certificate, they haven't actually gotten the skills or training they need. And that gets back to advising students, being able to have access to people who can help them make those wise decisions. I don't know if it's true across the board, but one of the first things to go when economic times trouble are positions like advising, and because the thought is, well, I need an English teacher or a math teacher, have to let the advisor go, right?
Yeah.
Please.
I just wanted to add a quick comment that I think is important, that creating a bridge between universities and this education sector with companies or the labor sector is not only beneficial for the student. I think that the school could really benefit from it in terms of understanding what they're teaching and whether it's actually applicable out there. I have many friends from across disciplines that they graduate and they're doing well, or however you want to call it, and then they they get a job, but nothing that they do there is related to what they learned in school. And undoubtedly, school has prepared them in many other ways, but not necessarily for what they're doing. So maybe creating that bridge can also actually help the school or a certain department create their curriculum a little bit better.
Yeah. I mean, there's a survey that asked like college deans or professors if they thought their students were prepared, their graduates were prepared for the work world, and of course, most of them thought that they were. And then you compare that to what employers say about what their experience is with recent college graduates, and I mean, it's different worlds. So they could use some more information.
Let me thank our speaker, Martha, for walking us through this topic. Thank all of you, not just for coming, but for your great questions and comments. Appreciate that. We'll be back here in a week with our next and final lecture of the semester. If you can join us, our colleague Molly Reynolds will be out from Brookings, and she's going to it's going to be a sort of a political focused lecture. It's going to be on the challenges that Republican governors have when the president is of your party, everybody. And we happen to be in one of those states. So it should be.
She's very good.
Yes, she is. So if you can join us, we'll look forward to seeing you then. Thanks a lot.